Welcome back to The Line. This week, Governor Susana Martinez announced that she will not support the Republican nominee, Donald Trump. This year, Ms. Martinez is currently the head of the Republican Governors Association. And Tom, the governor has criticized Mr. Trump in the past, but she didn't say she was definitely not support him until this week. And she just got tipped over the edge there. Your reaction, was that an early way to come out? I mean, she set it up by not being supportive previously. So.
Well, yeah, I mean, when the announcement came out, I really wasn't surprised.
Right.
I mean, because she's never been one of his big fans, and any involvement that she's had, just from an observer's perspective, has been as a reluctant governor, because of her power and position. So I'm not really, interested in, whether or not, who's supporting Mr. Trump. But more importantly, how does the governor now, since she's already said that she's not supporting any of the three major candidates, as far as Governor Johnson or Hillary Clinton, that she's, how do you motivate that base and turn that focus back to the state races? Right. And I think we saw some of that is now starting to come out the closer we get to the general election.
That's a good point there. Christina, I say again, sometimes some politicians realize it's a long game. And that if you swing back and forth with the winds, for example, this week we had a lot of Republicans aghast at Mr. Trump, and then they suddenly came back 48 hours later and said, well, hey, we're moving on. We have an election to win. Do you see what I mean? It's a tricky thing. So when Governor Martinez back away said she's not going to be for the guy, should we give her a lot of credit here? She was one of the first people to say this.
I certainly give her a lot of credit, and a lot of people in the state. You said that she had set up this rejection of Trump. Well, Trump did a really good job in setting it up himself, especially when he comes to our state and he denigrates the governor. I mean, even Democrats got offended by that, and certainly a number of Hispanic people got offended by that. So, but this is an election that we haven't seen before. And the point about what are the consequences of this non-endorsement, non-voting for Trump among Republicans is a major issue. And now we know that the young people, young Republicans across the state on several campuses, as well as our own UNM college Republicans, are saying no to Trump. They're going to go with Gary Johnson. So the consequences are that Hillary Clinton is provided an opportunity to do even better in this state, or maybe Gary Johnson will find himself in a pretty good position to give rival to Hillary Clinton. So it opens up a lot of possibilities.
And Merritt, that has serious consequences, that idea of what Christina's talking about, Gary Johnson being a spoiler, so to speak.
Indeed, because really without Johnson, you could kind of look at New Mexico as a state without a candidate. We had one candidate come to our state and call the governor of this state, of his party, everything but a child of God. We've had the other candidate, the opposition candidate, in leaked emails, her staff making really unpleasant references to Hispanics and Governor Richardson. So they're not really for us except for our votes and to win. There's not interest there. You drive around the Northeast Heights, highly Republican area, Johnson signs outnumbered Trump 10-1.
Wow.
So there is a possibility. I think it would be hard. I think it would be hard for Johnson to overcome Hillary supporters and get all the Democrat votes. Were it to happen, were Hillary to win all of her must-win states, were the stars to be aligned on Tuesday, all this, there is a possibility that the Electoral College could be divided evenly between Trump and Clinton, with our 5 votes going to Johnson. Then it would go to the House of Representatives, and Paul Ryan would be in the position of deciding who he'd rather work with in the White House. So certainly New Mexico is has more play, I think, than it has in previous elections, but I do think it's a long shot.
It's almost like a just add water. We're an instant swing state. Do you know what I mean? We were not a swing state for the longest time. Now suddenly we wake up one day, and to Merritt's point, Nate Silver's been out there saying, Merritt clued us all in as the, a couple days ago, this could be very impactful for the entire race, the state of New Mexico.
It could be, but the fact that the candidates still aren't coming here this late also shows that they've either given up the state or they're not worried. They don't think it's competitive. We may talk about it, but Hillary Clinton's not showing any interest in coming here. Donald Trump after he came in May, created a mini riot, has not decided to come back here. So I think that the only one who's visited recently was Gary Johnson. Gary Johnson is still here. This is his home state. So the fact that this is still going around, they're still putting all the resources towards Ohio and Florida and Virginia until recently where Trump has pulled out of it.
Would you anticipate a last-minute push here? We've got 3.5 some weeks to go. I mean, there's plenty of time for these folks to land here. Would it not be prudent to come here and just shore up your interests, so to speak?
If the race tightens, definitely, because the fact that if you were to win New Mexico, which is the state with the largest percentage of Hispanic votes, that you can put that in your back pocket that we won, that can carry you. But until that race tightens, what we're going to see like in 2012, where they kind of like, well, we're just writing this off. We've got other places to go where there's more lucrative electoral votes to go for. So
Right.
they'll only come here if the race tightens.
That makes sense. You know, Tom, obviously, as we sit here, the gray elephant over the entire country is what's going on right now with Mr. Trump and the allegations from lots and lots of women at this point that have been coming out. And you see it's starting to show up, the effect of this is starting to show up in some states where numbers for women's support for Mr. Trump is dropping precipitously. It is really, really dropping. We don't know what's up with New Mexico right now, so all we can do is just make a couple of predictions. Your sense of what the national, stuff going on, how it affects New Mexico and women voters here?
Well, I think that the initial impact, I mean, is negative, very negative impact on Trump and his efforts to really win voters, especially female voters, in New Mexico. Now, that's right now.
Right.
I mean, this has been one of the most volatile election cycle we've seen. So what is what is offending people right now might not. There might be something else that takes attention a week from now or 2 weeks from now. So, I'm not, everything is coming out is, a lot of us would say it's unrecoverable.
Right.
But this is really, in a typical election cycle, it would be unrecoverable. This is not a typical election
Pick
cycle.
up on that. That's an interesting point, isn't it?
Well, to add a little humor, Nate Silver also posted an electoral college map. And he said, and the title was, "If no women voted for Mr. Trump, what the map would look like." And of course, it looks solidly blue.
Right.
And that really drives the point home that the women's vote and the gender gap is really driving this election right now.
Right.
But let me mention that beyond presidential politics, or presidential politics are permeating our New Mexico politics. And the concerns that the Republican Party have from the governor on down among the Republicans is how do they stay with their majority in the state house, and the Democrats are wanting to hold on to their majority in the state Senate, but also take over again in the House.
Right.
And so we're seeing that the way in which the power dynamic is going at the top of the ticket will have consequences to who turns out to vote. If there's any crossover voting, and there usually isn't that much, but in a tight elections, it could mean the difference between whether a Democratic state legislator wins over a Republican one.
Merritt, pick up on that, because the down ticket stuff is no joke. I mean, there's decisions to be made by everyone running.
And I think that's a huge risk, and I think we've seen that play out with the New Mexico College Republicans disavowing Trump. The issue of sexual assault on campus has gone nationwide, and there have been many high-profile cases, and I don't think there's any way that you could back a candidate on a university campus with the record that Trump has. And so certainly, I think for, especially on campus and first-time voters and millennial voters, if I see Republican and I think Trump, I could think you're pro-sexual assault. I could think you want to build a wall and make Mexico pay for it. So he has very fringe out there views that are not the mainstream of the Republican Party, either right, center, what have you. But he's the brand.
Right.
And I don't know that Republicans can afford that brand and the down ticket votes.
Interesting, but Russell, some GOP folks, the state party GOP, is still sticking with him, supporting him, right down to the end. I mean, everybody has a line, certainly. I think Merritt makes a good point. If you're a young Republican on campus, you have a very different point of view about the world. Do you know what I mean? As opposed to if you're 65 living in some other part of our state. Do you expect that to continue? I couldn't imagine people completely abandoning this man at this point.
No, I mean, the leadership, they've had conference calls to say, well, we're still supporting Trump. So they get their cues from national leadership of the RNC. And there's also a belief that folks that have abandoned Trump, we've seen lately with the New York Times article, some are coming back because they see their bases responding.
Yep.
So now they have a self-interest to show some sort of tepid support or saying they're going to report the, quote, Republican nominee and not necessarily come strong at him, and then try to say, well, I want to focus on our larger goals as a party.
Right.
That is what they're getting around.
And going back to the previous question I asked you, I imagine a scenario where Mr. Trump, in fact, does come here to stump. Who shows up to support him? You know, to be on the classic background, you know, the local officials, that always happens when the presidential nominee. You know what I mean? That could be a real difficulty for some people.
Yeah, it's hard to say because
Yeah.
like Speaker Tripp didn't show up the last time.
That's right.
You had Nora Espinosa who did show up.
That's right.
Governor Martinez didn't want anywhere near it. I don't think that changes much because even today, if I were to call any Republican in leadership in the House or the Senate, they will say no comment and then talk off the record and
right.
give me a different take on that.
That's right. Interesting. Christina, I heard last night, I believe it's about 30% of the electorate right now is going to be women this cycle. 30% of voters is going to be a women's vote, and that number is just going to keep growing. Where does the GOP go from here when it comes for the women's vote? Because the further you fall behind, the more difficult it will be to catch up next cycle and the cycle after that. What happens for the GOP without the female vote?
They lose.
Yeah.
And again, it's an important component of an electoral winning coalition.
Right.
And so their meltdown in the party is really affecting the future of the Republican Party in more ways than one.
Right.
And it is not just with women. Again, I taught this in my politics classes at UNM, but that Republican self-study, the autopsy, so-called, told the Republican Party what they needed to do to move forward and to build a winning coalition nationwide, and that included not only women but Hispanics, African Americans, a burgeoning Asian American vote, and they just have not paid attention to that. So with Trump at the top of the ticket, it does not look good for future growth.
And the other part of that too, Tom, I know you're going to say something there, but we got to move on. Yeah. The idea that there's going to be more of these things coming out as it goes along. I mean, there can be no doubt now that more revelations about Mr. Trump are going to be out there, putting GOP folks in a more difficult position as it goes along.